14. I wanted to thank Wade for our new venue this year. It's a fabulous place, and so especially wanted to thank Pat Gottschalk and his marvelous assistant, Catherine Edwards. Without her wonderful support, this would not have been possible. And I'd like to introduce our speaker next, Tom Blue. Tom Blue is a veteran and pioneer in the field of private medicine. As a builder of private physician practices since 2002, he's got the unique perspective on the industry and the evolution, the ingredients for the success at the practice level, and the potential for physicians to use private medical business models to bring about the transformation of the American healthcare. In 2009, Tom accepted the role of Executive Director of the American Academy of Private Physicians, the National Professional Association for Private Physicians. Under his direction, the Academy rebranded itself, found its voice in the national media, has grown significantly to serve the ever-expanding ranks of physicians who are reinventing themselves and their practices across the United States. Tom is a strong believer in the idea that physicians, not policymakers, will lead the nation in the next era of medicine, the third era of medicine. He co-founded N1 Health in 2011 to support and amplify the work of physician visionaries seeking to restore the health of their communities. N1 Health is the first enterprise of its kind to make active capital investments in partnerships with physicians who wish to use private medical business models as a foundation on which to build and perfect the practices of the future. Backed by popular demand, please help me give a warm welcome to my friend Tom Blue.
Well, greetings everyone. This is maybe the coolest high-tech speaking venue that I've ever been in. So it appears we could broadcast this to the moon if we wish. So this is should be a fun and interesting talk. Can everybody hear okay? I must imagine you can. It combines three things. The first is a discussion about how it happens to be that we spend so much money on health care and we seem to get sicker and sicker all the time. And just by quick show of hands, who was at the last year's talk, about a year ago when we did this? Okay, so about half the folks. So as a way to set the framework for the discussion, you'll see a little bit of a repeated theme from the beginning of last year. And then we're going to depart into a different direction, which is to talk about 5 specific behaviors or beliefs that inform our behaviors that are, at least as best I can tell, contributing to the dramatic undermining of the health of Americans. And then, mostly for fun, I wanted to share with you all just a couple of really interesting technologies that are medical innovations they seem quite futuristic, but are in fact right around the corner. And I think that you'll find them interesting. So on your tables, I've left a survey. This is something I'm going to do. I'll probably do this talk a good handful of times for different business audiences in different places around the country. And so I'm very interested to gather the opinions of business leaders on these subjects. So the questions on here are kind of laid out generally along the flow of the content of this conversation. So as you go, if you want to fill this in, I'm going to compile it, and then if you leave your email, I'll email it back to you all with what we find, and I may update it periodically just if things change among communities. Hey Don, come join us up front. So anyway, so that's what that's doing. They're doing. A colleague of mine, Ethan Hope, will gather them up at the end of the event. So, having said that, we're going to talk a bit about the future of health, not of health care, but of health, which I think we'll find more entertaining to talk about. So, I'm riding on an airplane about 2 months ago, I guess, and I read this quote from the President of the United States, which says, "We have the finest medical facilities and highly skilled, dedicated health professionals, yet many of our people still lack adequate medical care, and the cost of care is rising so rapidly it jeopardizes our health goals and other important social objectives." Does anyone find that in any way remarkable that the President would say that? I mean, on any given day, not just the President, but most any politician could say this. And we would see it on the news and say, okay, yeah, next. The thing that's so remarkable is that the president was Jimmy Carter, and the year was 1977. And so it leads you to the conclusion that whatever it is that has infected our healthcare system and set us on this course to nowhere, or arguably worse than to nowhere, is not going to change from the top down. And so John made the comment in my introduction that, that I just am a personal believer that it's physicians and consumers that are likely to transform healthcare and not policymakers and industry stakeholders who are the beneficiaries of our largest industry. So if you look at our strategy for managing health in the country and how that's playing out purely as a financial matter, Jimmy made his comments back here where this arrow is, and since that time, pay no attention to these broken down numbers. The sum total of how we're spending goes up like this. Here's 2008. We'd be up and around the 3 trillion mark. It's not slowing down. And so you can see that this is an unmitigated disaster, and there's simply no other way to view it other than that we're just burning up money. And when you overlay this with what we get out of it, not even in the top 20 in terms of the healthiest industrialized countries, you have to ask yourself, how in the world is this even possible? That we could be spending like this and getting so little in return, and talking about it since 1977 as though it's a serious issue. And I think everyone, as they look at it, even back in 77, it looked like a dire, horrible situation, and yet we're paralyzed. And so, exploring why it is that this is the case is a nice way of laying the foundation to then saying, okay, what do we need to do as individuals about this problem? Because again, I'm gonna advance the notion that this is something that is going to have to resolve at a grassroots consumer level and build from there, because I think since 77 we've seen it's not going to happen any other way. So how did we get here? I would suggest that we are pinned at the collision of moral and fiduciary obligation. On the moral side, we have physicians and scientists who understand how to restore and create and even grow health. On the fiduciary side, we have the largest industry in the United States, publicly traded companies that have a moral and legal obligation to not stop making money. And these things have collided, not in a way where there's someone evil twisting their mustache wishing us all dead, but simply the incentive structure that we have has us deadlocked. And I have a feeling that it's going to be consumers, the real payers for healthcare, consumers, employers, and physicians that are likely to jolt us out of this deadlocked position. The fact that a primary care doctor today has the technology and the know-how to largely eliminate the risk of our largest killer, a heart attack, is great news from a moral perspective. It's crappy for business. A heart attack sets in motion roughly $1 million of commerce in our healthcare system. And so on the one hand, as human beings, we're thrilled at the idea that our largest killer can be almost extinguished. As business people, in the business of whether it's medications or procedures or the myriad of other economies that live around cardiovascular disease, this is a very threatening idea. So the business of diseases is staggeringly large, cardiovascular disease being our biggest. It's a $444 billion industry by itself, just cardiovascular disease. I had to put this little blue line in because that's the fast food industry. And so you can see it's enormous. It's a national economy for some countries. And so the idea that we're going to suddenly awaken and say, wow, thank goodness we've invented technologies that are simple to assess this risk. We don't really have to have the dependence on medication as much as other more lifestyle-oriented remedies, and in fact we can stop these massive events from happening. It's good news and bad news, and we're locked in the middle. So how did we get to this weird place where no one wants us all sick and dead, but yet we keep getting sicker and sicker and more dependent on medications as we go? The story of this, and when John mentioned the third era of medicine, this is just a way, as sitting around medical conferences and listening to doctors talk for year after year after year, it's just a little way of telling this story that I kind of concocted. And so, walk with me down this path, and then I'll kind of take you through it fairly quickly, and we'll get into the behaviors that then need to flow out of this discovery. From the dawn of time, when people became concerned about matters of health, until really only recently, say the mid-1950s, anyone who was concerned with the health of a person was probably fixated and preoccupied with infectious disease. Because this is the thing that killed everybody. You know, you cut yourself or get bitten by something or catch some bug, and you know, you could be dead. And so that was a tragedy that was cutting short people's lives. And so for generation after generation, this is the thing that we all thought about in, you know, in the world of health. And Louis Pasteur, who's a great kind of father and face person for this era of medicine, the first era, he says if we can intervene in the antagonism observed between some bacteria, it would offer perhaps the greatest hope for therapeutics. And so the idea was, if we could figure out, you know, how to change the behavior or kill these bugs that are invading us and causing us to die, then we can restore health. And so in the first era of medicine, we won the battle by the invention of antibiotics and antivirals, essentially magic bullets designed to seek out and exploit the vulnerability of these bugs. And it was a magnificent victory. And so, armed with the exuberance of this victory, we sort of etched into our medical minds as a culture that all things disease are or behave as bugs that invade us in the night. And so, to restore us to health, we must identify the vulnerability of those bugs and design the magic bullet and the intervention to kill them. And it made perfect sense back in the mid-1900s. Unfortunately, times have changed, but at that moment, we now had more doctors. And so we thought to ourselves, okay, we have our first era strategy of let's intervene with a magic bullet. Let's now figure out what to do with these legions of doctors, and we're going to add an element of divide and conquer to our strategy. So rather than having all doctors do everything the same, we're going to divide up the profession along the lines of geography or organ systems. So you take the heart, and you take the lungs, and you take the brain, and you take the kidneys. You know, we got somebody to do primary care, and so now we've aligned our troops, you know, to focus on particular regions of the body, so that now not only are we going to identify the bug, but we're going to have people who specialize in where that bug happens to live and wreak havoc, and then it'll up our odds of finding the right intervention. And again, it made a heck of a lot of sense back in 1950. The problem is that we have cemented our healthcare system in this structure, and this structure, as it turns out, has an extraordinary influence over the behavior not only of the payer system, but of the physicians and of consumers and of employers. The entire healthcare economy is heavily affected by this first era mentality that we carried into the second era.